Welcome to the Newsong podcast. I'm so glad that you joined us today. Now sit back and enjoy this message.
I looked like Quasimodo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame. That is what I looked like. I woke up the morning that I was supposed to preach with sun poisoning that I have never experienced in my life. You can take it down. That's horrible. It's hilarious, though. And I walked downstairs and saw myself in the mirror, and I yelled, "Thomas!" And he came meandering down the stairs, and he looked at me, and he went, "I am not preaching for you," he said. And then later that day, he said, "You know, I didn't want to tell you before you had to get up to preach, but you look like Quasimodo." And I lost it and pulled that picture up and put them side by side, because I am a firm believer that you can't have joy if you can't laugh at yourself. And I know that's not what I really look like. I had sun poisoning and I was very sick. And so I'm feeling like, when I woke up this morning, I was like, whew, this is good. Even though my hair's a little crimped by the microphone, I am feeling good this morning. So I don't know. I know that the Lord is incredible in the way that he puts things together. And I did not know the worship set, nor did Pastor Bethany know what I was speaking on this morning when she selected the worship songs. But I am so happy that we sang that song about seeing a victory, because the battle belongs to the Lord. Because this morning we're going to take some time and look at David and Goliath. And we are going to look at lessons, 3 key things that I think that David teaches us about how to approach the giants in our life. We know, if you've been in church at all, I am actually pretty sure that even if you showed up to like one Sunday school class your entire life, you likely know the story of David and Goliath. But there is one overarching theme that we see that is often taught on when it comes to David and Goliath, and that is the song that we just sang. The battle belongs to the Lord. We do not win battles by our own strength. We do not face giants with our own abilities and our own tools. But I think when we look deeper at the text, there's 3 specific things that David teaches us about not just knowing that the battle belongs to the Lord and the victory belongs to the Lord, but as believers who know who God is, how do we approach the giants in our life? What is different about the way that I approach giants in my life, or battles or trials or tribulations, from somebody who doesn't know the Lord? Why is it different for me? And if you know me at all, you know that I can't preach a message without at least giving you a little bit of background history and context for the text that we're going to look at. So, a little bit of history on the Philistines. The Philistines were an incredibly established and powerful people at the time that we're reading in 1 Samuel 17. If you want to turn there, that's where we're going to hang out all morning, is 1 Samuel 17. They lived on the coast. They had extremely fertile lands. They also had very well-established policies, political empires, and fortified cities. This is in a time when Israel is still living in tents. The people of Philistine, the Philistine people were giants in and of themselves. Even if they weren't big in stature, the nation, they were a powerhouse of the time. In fact, it is widely believed by scholars that the jealousy that the Israelites felt for the Philistines, and a desire to beat them in battle, because they lived close together, so there was always little turf wars going on about, hey, that's my land, no, that's my land. And the Israelites couldn't beat them. The Philistines were using iron when the rest of the world was using bronze. They were very, very advanced. And the people of Israel were sick and tired of losing every time they went up against the Philistines. And they were jealous. They were jealous of their fertile land. They were jealous of their empire and their cities while they were all, sleeping in tents in the wilderness. And so it is well believed that it was this motive that caused Israel to go before the judges and the Lord and say, we want a king. Look, they have a king. Look how well off they are. We can't beat the Philistines when we don't have a king. And we know how well that turned out for them, right? They got Saul, who for a while was a decent king, and eventually he fell because he got prideful and wanted to take the glory for every battle won for himself, which this isn't exactly what I'm preaching on this morning, but I wonder if that is why the Lord would not give this specific battle victory to Saul. When we read the story of David and Goliath, Saul gets no credit. And I wonder if the Lord knew if Saul wins this battle, the people will look to him instead of me. So the Lord came up with this plan for David to come and win this battle in a way that was absolutely, undeniably the Lord. There was no way to look at this story and go, oh, well, David just was really good with a slingshot. No, you read the story and you go, the Lord brought this victory. And I believe that is one of the reasons why the Lord chose to do it that way. So I want to look at three things, three lessons that David teaches us through this story about how are we supposed to approach giants in our life. And thankfully, we live in 2026, so our giants aren't actually physical beings standing before us that we have to kill with a slingshot. But we all have battles, we all have trials, we all have giants. Pastor listed a few of examples this morning in worship. We all have addictions. We all have pride. We all have doubt. We all have fill in the blank, fear, anxiety, depression. There are things in our life that look like giants to us that we have to face. And so what does David teach us about our posture and our attitude when we approach these giants? The first thing that I think that David teaches us is that motivation matters. If you look with me, we're going to start in verse 20 of chapter 17. And now, before this, we see again, I'm not going to belabor this because we all know the story of David and Goliath, but Goliath has been coming out every day, not just taunting the people of Israel, but taunting their God. He's been saying slurs against the God of Israel, and then he's challenging them. Instead of us just fighting a battle against one another, how about you just send out your strongest warrior, and we'll have a duel. And if I win, you become our slaves. And if you win, the Philistines will become your slaves. Let's just save some bloodshed and just do man-to-man combat here, one-on-one. And so this is where we pick up in verse 20. David is a shepherd. He is too young to be in battle. He's back home tending his sheep. And this is where we pick up the story. Verse 20 says, So David arose early in the morning and left the flock with a keeper and took the supplies and went just as Jesse had commanded them. His dad said, hey, it's been a while. Your brothers are probably hungry. Go to the front lines of the battle and bring your brothers some supplies. And he came to the circle of the camp while the army was going out in a battle array, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines drew up in battle array, army against army. They're coming out every day, lining up and hurling insults back and forth at one another. They're taunting each other from side to side. Neener, neener, neener. This cracks me up when I read it, because if women were in charge of the way that wars were fought, this is not how we would do it. But all these men line up and look at each other, and none of them are brave enough to charge and begin a war, but they sure are going to talk. And they're going back and forth with one another. It says in verse 22, Then David left his baggage in the care of the baggage keeper and ran to the battle line and entered in order to greet his brothers. As he was walking with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine from Gath named Goliath, was coming up from the army of the Philistines. And he spoke the same words that he had spoken the day before, and David heard them. When all the men of Israel heard, they fled and were greatly afraid. The men of Israel said, Have you seen this man who is coming up? Surely he's coming up to defy Israel, and it will be that the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and he will give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Israel. That's the way that men's brains work. Then David spoke to the men who were standing by him, saying, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away this reproach from Israel? Listen, for who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God? You hear two different motives in these two groups. We have the men of Israel who are like, listen, somebody's about to strike the lottery. If they can defeat Goliath, not only will they save us, but they're going to get riches. They'll probably get to marry the king's daughter. They are going to be glorified in our history from now until forever. The glory is resting on the one who defeats Goliath. That's the motivation. And then you have David, who says, okay, so all of that will be done, but who is this man who thinks that he can taunt the armies of the living God? David's heart was set on the Lord and protecting the name and the reputation of his God and his God's people. He had an anger that was burning within him that was enough motivation to overcome the fear. You notice that the motivation for glory and riches and freedom wasn't enough to motivate any one of those men to get up and pick up their sword and volunteer to go fight Goliath. But David said, no one will taunt my God, and no one will taunt his people. His motivation was different. And because of that, he was able and capable of overcoming the natural fear that anyone would feel if they were approaching a giant, especially somebody who was untrained. And he was able to march. Church, listen, our hearts should burn so intensely to protect the name of our God and his people that we're willing to overcome any and all fear to face giants that the world would tell us we have no chance of defeating. David looked at the battle ahead, knowing that his motivation was pure and that it mattered. He knew, if I go into this battle because I want to prove to my brothers, my big brothers, that I am just as important as they are, that he would not win this battle. His motivation was to protect the name of the Lord and defend his people. What is your Goliath? What is the thing that you feel or the world would tell you that you have no business trying to defeat? Or maybe it's something that you've tried in your own strength to overcome and failed. We all know what that feels like. Maybe it's addiction, laziness, fear. We've listed these things already, and the list goes on and on. Like Pastor said, a lot of our problems are first world problems, but a lot of them are spiritual. They're spiritual battles, they're spiritual giants that we have to face and overcome. So let me ask you, what is motivating you to face your giant? Is it personal glory? Is it wanting everybody to look at all the things that you've done and all that you've overcome and pat you on the back because you're stronger than everybody around you? Or are you looking the enemy in the face and saying, you will not make a fool of God and God's people? You don't get to win. Side note here, if we read on, look at with me at verse 28. It says, now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger burned against David, and he said, why have you come down, and with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? You can hear the animosity in these words. I know your insolence and the wickedness of your heart, for you have come down in order to see the battle. But David said, what have I done now? Was it not just a question? Then he turned away to the other and asked the same thing, and the people answered the same as before. There will be people who will question your heart and your motives when you are working to overcome whatever idol, whatever giant you are facing. There will be people who will speak ill of you and your motive and try to convince others that you are in it for the wrong reasons. Do not let the voices of those who refuse to fight with you influence you when you go to fight a battle in the name of the Lord. Notice that Eliab didn't volunteer to go either. The second thing that I believe that David teaches us about how we approach our giants is that we fight our battles dressed as who God created us to be. We're going to pick up in verse 31. When the words which David spoke were heard, they told them to Saul and sent for him. So something that David said stirred the army enough that somebody who had access to the king said, hey, David is pretty fired up about these taunts, and he's riling everybody up. He's saying some stuff. David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail on account of him, for your servant will go and fight this Philistine. And I'm sure that it wasn't with this voice, but when I read this, I hear the tone of a wife who's asked her husband to take the trash out 4 times, and she finally goes, I'll just do it. That's what I hear in David. It's like, if fine, nobody's going to do it, fine, I'll do it, I'll go. Then Saul said to David, you are not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, while he has been a warrior from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant was tending his father's sheep when a lion and a bear came and took a lamb from the flock. I went out after him, attacked him, and rescued it from its mouth. And when he rose up against me, I seized him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted the armies of the living God. Again, there you hear David's motivation. He's not wanting to go to battle to prove himself, but to defend the name of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, again, notice who's getting the glory for David's victories. He will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and may the Lord be with you. Then Saul clothed David with his garments and put a bronze helmet on his head and clothed him with armor. David girded his sword over the armor and tried to walk, for he had not yet tested them. So David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. And David took them off. He took his stick in his hand and chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's bag, which he had. He had his shepherd's bag because he was a shepherd. He put the stones in the pouch, and he approached the Philistine with his sling in his hand. David was a shepherd, not a soldier. Yet, David actually grows to be what is known as one of the greatest military minds of this time. He becomes a warrior later in his life, but in this moment, David is a shepherd. He's of the tribe of Benjamin, which is the lowliest tribe in Israel. His father's house was not well known, and he was the youngest brother. Even his brothers didn't like him. They felt envious of him. They felt like he was a threat. He had nothing but his sheep, and he refused to play dress up and pretend to be something he was not when he went out to face the giant that was before him. He said, I've killed a lion and a bear to protect my sheep. That's who David was, a shepherd. And in this moment, he is willing to fight a lion and a bear, so to speak, in order to protect the people of Israel. When presented with the chance to put on the king's armor and fight like a soldier, which, let's be honest, is what I would want. I'm going out to face a giant. I'll take a sword, please, and a shield and a breastplate. Please, guard me up. I don't want to go out there with nothing but a sling and a rock. David was wise enough to know that in order to win the battle set before him, he needed to be who God created him to be, not who others around him thought he should be. He needed to be a shepherd protecting his sheep. He refused to use worldly wisdom, and that's exactly what the situation called for. We know that if he had tried to stumble out onto that battlefield in armor that was not meant for him, with a sword that he did not know how to use, this story would have ended much differently. An untrained soldier with a sword in his hand is not just useless, but can be dangerous. But a seasoned shepherd with a sling, protecting his sheep, can kill a bear, a lion, and a giant. We have to approach giants in our life with the gifts and the calling that God has on us as individuals. We all have different strengths. Mine are different than yours. Yours are different than your spouse's. We all have different tools that God has put in our hands. And we can't just trade gifts and talents to fight our battles. We can come alongside one another and fight battles together. That's fantastic. That's a different sermon. But I cannot pretend to be Katie when I'm fighting my battles. I'm not. And we get in this comparison battle with people around us. If only I could handle my giants the way Barb handles hers. Comparison is the thief of joy. I want to ask you, are you trying to fight battles with a sword that was never meant for you? Quit playing dress up and face your battles dressed as the men and women that God called you to be, using your past victories to encourage you along the way. Notice that David didn't say, I've got this because I killed a bear. The scripture says that he said, the Lord delivered me from the paw of the bear and the lion. He wasn't confident in his own strength and abilities. He was confident that his God never fails. And so he said, that's fine. I don't need the sword and the shield and the helmet. I'll just go out and fight this battle the way that the Lord has created me to do it. And he will win. And that brings me to point 3, which is that we fight differently when our faith is not in ourselves. We fight differently when we do not put our faith in ourselves. Verse 41, we're going to wrap this story up. Then the Philistine came on and approached David with his shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistines looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth and ruddy with a handsome appearance. The Philistine said to David, Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine also said to David, Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field. Then David said to the Philistine, You come to me with sword and spear and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. This day the Lord will deliver you up to my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you, and I will give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth, that the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all his assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give it into our hands. Then it happened that the Philistine rose and came and drew near to meet David. And listen to this. David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. David put his hand into his bag and took a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. And the stone sank into his forehead so that he fell on his face to the ground. Thus David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. And he struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in David's hand. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his own sword and drew it out of its sheath and killed him and cut off his head. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Verse 48 says, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. This act makes no sense in our worldly perspective. Historians argue about the actual size of Goliath based on different texts that they've seen, but they know that he was somewhere between 6'7" and 9'6". 6'7" might not be a giant, but it's pretty stinking tall, especially considering the fact that the Israelite men usually tapped out at about 5'3". It's about the tallest that the Israelites got. And David's a youth, so he's likely 5'1". So even on the lesser end of what historians think Goliath may have stood, he's still pretty tall. He's pretty domineering in his appearance, and for days and days and days on end, the Israelites have heard nothing but this man's conquests and his victories. Goliath never lost a fight, ever. So even if he wasn't 9'6", like some historians think, his persona was gigantic. His presence was terrifying. And David ran toward this man with nothing but the tools that God had equipped him with. David was a shepherd that refused to act like anything but who God created him to be, and he ran towards his giant. Why? Why? Why was David confident enough to run towards a man that could literally, with a flick of his wrist, decapitate him in battle? Why was he so sure that this was going to come out in his favor? He ran not because he was confident in his ability with his slingshot. He ran not because he was so proud of himself for killing a lion and a bear that he knew that no matter what, he was strong enough to beat even this man. He ran because he knew who God was. David was extremely familiar with the character of God. You see, David spent his entire life by himself out in the fields, tending sheep, with nobody to talk to. So what did he do? He talked to the Lord, and he played his harp. He worshiped. He spent time with God. He knew who Yahweh was, and that is where his confidence was. He knew two very important things about his God because of his experiences with the lion and the bear and the amount of time that he'd spent communing with his God. He knew, one, God will not be taunted. He was an Israelite that was raised in ancient Israel tradition. If they knew one thing, if they taught their children one thing, it is that you do not defame the name of Yahweh. David knew, my God will not be taunted. He will not allow this to continue any further. This isn't about me. God will not allow you to defame his name for one more second. He knew that. The other thing he knew is that God wouldn't abandon his servant. What David learned from fighting the lion and the bear wasn't, look at how great I am and how fast I can sling a rock out of my slingshot. What he learned is, my God will deliver me from every battle that I walk into. He knew his motives were pure, and he was pure of heart. His intentions were in the right place. He knew he wasn't playing dress up and pretending to be something that he wasn't. And so he knew the Lord will be with me. David in Psalms writes that the Lord goes before me, behind me, and beside me. The Lord encompasses all of David. And David was so confident in that he ran into a battle that he was unprepared, unqualified, and untrained to fight. Who are you, who am I, placing my faith in when I fight a battle or face a giant? What is worthy of my trust except the Lord? We learned three very important things from David. We really learned four things from this story. One being the overarching thing that we've learned since we were little, which is that God fights our battles for us. But the three things that we learn from David, when you are approaching a battle or you are fighting a giant in your life, is that the motivation matters. Your heart, where your heart is, it matters. We are called to fight battles dressed like ourselves and no one else. We need to walk in who God created us to be. And when we have our faith placed in the right person, we have the strength to run into battles that the world would tell us that we have no business fighting. You would bow your heads with me and pray. Lord, we thank you that you go before us and behind us. Lord, that you walk with us every step of the way. Lord, that we have confidence not in ourselves or in our own abilities, Lord, but only in who you are and what you have called us to do. Lord, let us be a people who are so sure of our calling that we do not hear the voices of the scoffers, that we do not hear the voices of those who question whether we're doing the right thing or for the right reasons. Lord, let us have our eyes fixed on you and your mission and your calling. Lord, let not a single giant or a single battle distract us from what you have called us to do. Lord, in Jesus' name, I pray that
if you've been impacted by this message, join those who so generously give so we can reach more people with the story of Jesus. Visit newsongcs.com/give or text the word EASY to 94000.